Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I call to order the meeting of the Webster Groves TIF. I call the meeting of the Webster Groves TIF Commission to order. Before the clerk calls the roll, I will remind folks to please silence their cell phones. If you need to take a call, please leave the room. We will go over our public hearing process and procedures before we take any testimony. If you do wish to speak, please make sure to register to do so by filling out a slip from the table in the hallway or by raising your hand on the Zoom call. Fran, will you please call roll of the members?
Kyle Wilson,
Here.
Ryan Murphy, Clark Hoteling,
Here.
Pam Frazier,
Here.
Mark Hinkle,
Here.
Adrian Nelson Roberts,
Here.
Ray Galk,
Here.
Paul Hample,
Here.
Jay Nelson,
Here.
Jacob Trimble, Kevin McKenna,
Present. Sorry.
David Addison,
Here.
Okay, there is a quorum present and we will proceed to the stated agenda. Members, the draft minutes have been presented to you. Here. As hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any corrections? Well, I'm hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from September 1st, 2021? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the minutes from September 1st, no, excuse me, September 15th, 2021 are approved. Okay, I will ask our staff liaison, Eric Peterson, to review the public hearing procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and everyone on Zoom. I hope you can hear me okay. Can everyone on Zoom hear me? I get nods, all right.
Yes.
All right,
Here you
Loud
are.
and clear.
Thank you.
thank you. So tonight, and I'm going to turn around here briefly, we do have on the back table for all of you, a public hearing procedures document. As the chair did mention, we would ask if you're going to speak in present tonight here to please fill out one of the small slips, bring it us to the green table. We will call folks in order that we receive the slips. And also for those on Zoom, you can use the raise your hand function on the bottom of Zoom. That will record the order that you raised your hand, and we'll be able to call on you. We intend to alternate tonight between in-person speaking and on Zoom until we don't have one or the other. We'll just continue down the line. If you are speaking on Zoom, we do ask that you give us your name and address, as we don't have that information recorded because you're not filling out a slip. So just please do so. The time limit per the TIF Commission's guidelines that they adopted at our last meeting is 3 minutes. So you'll hear the buzzer go off, finish up your comments and statements, and the chair will remind you if you're using up your grace period to be done and move through our hearing. For the members, all the submitted public comment is before you through 4 o'clock today for the guidelines of the commission. So that did expand. We did receive multiple emails today. And so all those documents are there, and we will of course ask for them to be entered into the record as we move through the public hearing process. Also, the TIF Commission email remains open. The documents received after this will not be part of the public hearing record, but certainly will be part of the record of the overall TIF Commission in the minutes of those as we continue to provide you information. So tonight, I think we are prepared to move quickly into the hearing when you are ready. We discussed with the chair members, so you know, and for the public, just make it easier since we have the slips, we'll call you up from the clerk's table to come speak. So you'll hear us calling your name. For those on Zoom, the same. And then again, a reminder, if you're on Zoom, please, we do need your name and address for the record. So members, I will happy to answer any questions if you have about the process for the public hearing tonight. Other than I'll give one final statement. Obviously, we can look at time as we go through this process, should the commission desire, and if there's a volume of public comment that it still wishes to receive. If we have lines of people waiting, we certainly can continue the hearing, or you can adjourn the hearing tonight. That does not, adjourning the hearing doesn't mean that the vote on TIF happens. It is simply closing the public comment portion of the TIF process. Should you do that. I'm happy to answer questions from the members. I see Mr. Addison was hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that for tonight, there is no intention to take a vote tonight. Even if we get done with all the public comments, we will just be listening to the public comments, and any vote will occur on a separate occasion.
Thank you, Mr. Addison. We did put on the agenda the resolution so that you could discuss if you wish, but we have unheard from each of you and many of you that you wish to have the vote be at a later date at your next meeting. So that is your decision as the commission to make, and we did not want to, as staff, make that decision for you, but I do believe that that is the intent of members that, as I've heard it, is to hold the vote in November. But again, that's your decision, and we have time for you to discuss that tonight. That answer your question, Mr. Addison?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Doesn't sound like it.
Final note on your microphones. Obviously, the chair's mic's alive, as this one is, but if you do need to speak, remember to press your button and speak directly into the microphone. It will light up. You'll know that you're on.
All right, we're going to go ahead and start the public hearing. The first point of order in the public hearing is an update and an overview of the redevelopment plan and the project from development strategies.
Thank you, commissioners and members of the public that are here in person and virtual. My name is Justin Carney, and with me tonight is Katie Medlin, and we are with Development Strategies. We have been hired by the city to do some analysis and provide some key documents that are needed as part of the TIF Commission's review of a request for tax increment financing incentives, economic development tools, if you will, for the Douglas Hill development. And tonight we're going to basically provide another overview for you, a quick review for you, and an overview for those that have maybe not heard our presentation tonight, really to provide some insight and some overview of the three key pieces that we have of analysis and documentation that we have done for the city and for the commission. Do we have a clicker for the, just tell you when? Okay, so next slide then, thank you. So the three pieces tonight that we're going to talk about, the redevelopment plan, the blighting analysis, and talking about blighting factors, and then spend most of the time, Katie will walk us through the cost benefit analysis, the numbers aspect of the development and the request for tax increment financing. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start with the redevelopment plan. And the redevelopment plan is really the summary document that pulls together all of the key pertinent information supplied by the developer as part of our analysis that pulls all of that information together. The redevelopment plan talks about existing conditions. It talks about the phasing of the project, the costs associated with the project, and then it includes the cost benefit analysis that we'll go into in just a moment. One of the key pieces of the redevelopment plan and provided by the developers is what's called redevelopment project areas, RPAs, and the development, the entire site, the entire redevelopment area is carved up into 3 RPAs, redevelopment project areas, as a way to do a few things. One is it brings the development, it kind of creates a phasing for the development so that the developer is not putting necessarily all of the costs at once as it's phasing in the revenue that is generated from the development. It breaks it down into manageable pieces and kind of a program for the developer to use moving forward. And it's also very important because this phasing, each of the RPAs has its own phasing. And so the TIF revenues that are generated over a 23-year period. And each one of the RPAs has their own 23-year clock. And so it's important to recognize what developments are coming online with each RPA, what costs are associated with each RPA, and then that cost benefit analysis and that revenue projections, and basically the 23-year tax increment financing capture time period starts with the development of each RPA. And so I'll talk about phasing here in a minute. One of the things I want to point out right before we hop off of this map is you can see the 3 RPAs here. They are different in size. And the biggest thing I'll draw your attention to is that RPA 1 not only includes the development of the actual development program and the buildings with the development, but it includes the infrastructure that is needed for the entire site redevelopment area. And so those infrastructure pieces and those costs associated with the infrastructure of the entire site are associated with RPA 1. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read a table to you. You all have the table in front of you, but it's it's a summary of what we call the development program provided by the developer of the types of development that are happening for each RPA and the phasing for each one of those RPAs. And just a couple of highlights here. In RPA 1, as I said, it's the largest in the terms of the development project pieces, the development program pieces. We have apartments, condominiums, and townhomes. So the largest residential component of about 482 units being constructed with RPA 1. And it also includes 8,000 to 9,000 square feet of retail restaurant space associated with that. That phasing for that would be commencing in 2021 and then have the 23-year period after that. RPA 2, it's a smaller land area. And this is where the office is concentrated from the redevelopment program. You can see a little over 115,000 square feet of office, as well as approximately 25,000 square feet of restaurant and retail space with an apartment building of around 110 units. And that phasing would start in 2023, and that's when its clock would start. RPA 3, again, is predominantly residential with some commercial. You can see there 136 residential units of apartments and condominiums with around 14,000 square feet of restaurant and retail. And then you can see the breakdown or the total of the entire redevelopment program. And it's these numbers and each of these pieces that have different revenue generation and generate different revenue at different time, and then obviously have different costs associated with them, again, that we'll get into with the cost benefit analysis. Sure.
Regards to the square footage and the units that are listed there, is that a guaranteed square footage in units in each of those individual categories? Or is that something that would be guaranteed through a development agreement?
The numbers here, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, it's through the development agreement, correct? So the numbers that we have here are the initial numbers that are provided. If we put a pin in a number just because we have to generate revenue and costs, but the numbers that we've been given, this is it. There's a little bit of a range there, and there's sort of and maybe Mark can elaborate, but there's a justifiable range that is expected from the TIF redevelopment plan into the redevelopment agreement. You bet. Next slide. And again, I'm not going to read a table to you, but I just wanted to note that the developer has put together a list of estimated costs that are associated with getting the Douglas Hill redevelopment off the ground. And I guess two things that I will highlight here. These are all of the kind of associated costs with development. And The two big pieces that are here that I want to highlight are the property acquisition and the infrastructure costs. And those significant costs are predominantly what are being requested for the TIF to be paying for, is acquisition and infrastructure. There may be some other smaller associated costs within this table that would also get paid for by the TIF, but those are the predominant pieces, the predominant costs that the TIF revenue would be looking to offset. I believe that is all I will highlight here. I just also will say that the cost for infrastructures you see isn't really associated with any of the single RPAs. They are area wide, but predominantly expected to be incurred during the first RPA.
These
order-
estimated costs, these were provided by the developer.
Correct.
Did you guys do any due diligence to determine whether these numbers are reasonable or the accuracy of them?
I mean, we are not cost estimators. We looked at the cost and, based on what we know construction costs right now in St. Louis. Again, costs can change by the hour, basically. That's been tracking that. But, based on what the market's been doing right now, it appears reasonable.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this before I move on to the blight analysis? If not, Eric, next slide, next two slides, we'll just go in. So one of the key factors of the TIF enabling legislation is a determination of blight, and a blight analysis needs to be conducted. And the definition of blight is set by state statute, and it's here on the screen. A couple of thoughts that I want to just mention for the commission and the public is that without reading all of this to you, it's a preponderance of insanitary and unsafe conditions, deterioration of site improvements. It's a combination of factors that inhibit or really, set back the potential for redevelopment of an area. And so when a lot of people think of blight, they may have a visual of what blight is and immediately think of very dilapidated conditions. And it's important from the state statute perspective that blight is not just about dilapidation. There are also factors that you can see, as well as sort of what I call structural factors that all come together to help inform what, whether or not a site is blighted or not. So next slide, and this is really a summary of the analysis, and trying to represent this as much as we can in a single graphic and a single map here. But a couple of things I guess I will highlight. One is that we do the blight analysis looking at it at a parcel by parcel basis, but the idea is that there's a preponderance of factors for the entire redevelopment area. And so you may see there may be a site that just has an aging building, and that's the only factor. Or maybe it's an aging building and overgrown vegetation, and those are the two factors. But as you go around each individually and then put that together, again, we're talking about a preponderance of factors as you look at that for the entire redevelopment area. A couple of things that we looked at that I think jumped out at us the most when determining the factors of blight. The overgrown vegetation goes right through the northern third of the site. Concrete pads and gravel parking and deteriorated pavement of parking areas because of the age of several of the lots and the developments on the lot. We have gravel and deteriorated pavement throughout the development area. Several areas at different points in time, we were out on site a couple of different times and saw improperly stored materials, as well as parcels with ADA accessibility issues. And that comes very significantly with the age of the developments on the site. So what I think you can see the factors that we've identified here. And again, it's a preponderance of of these factors as it impacts the site. And I think the last thing I will leave you with on the blight side of, on the blight analysis side of things is that it's, as I said, a preponderance of the area, and somebody, could maybe reasonably say, well, any one of these factors might be able to be addressed by the existing property owner, but I think it's a culmination of they aren't, they haven't. And if you are a neighbor and you see that your neighbor isn't, you are less likely to, and that sort of kind of reinforces and kind of brings together why we talk about this from a preponderance standpoint. And it is the ability to redevelop this requires remediation, of all of these factors within all of these parcels. And again, kind of throughout the entire redevelopment area. And that's how we look at that and determine and come at a determination of blight. And so I will leave you with that. I don't know if there's any questions with that.
I do have some questions, Mr. Carney.
You bet.
Could you tell me how many citations for overgrown vegetation has occurred in this general area?
So we reached out to the city, this would have been back in the early summer, I believe, and there were no citations that were open.
Okay.
Currently, I don't believe there were any building citations open as well, and very few citations that appeared to have been issued in the past as well.
Okay. So with this overgrown vegetation, does it appear to be largely along a creek by chance?
Partly creek bed, but also much farther upland.
Does the city's zoning ordinance include any sort of no disturb areas that would be typical for creeks in the St. Louis County region to have these types of no disturb buffers that perhaps
I'm not
could
sure about that.
explain some of
Somebody with
that?
the city
Okay.
would have to answer that, but we did observe overgrown vegetation on many parcels, actually adjacent to businesses. Some
Okay.
areas where overgrown vegetation was immediately next to structures. So it would be well beyond creek area in multiple locations.
Does the city of Webster Groves have a comprehensive land use plan?
I believe so, yeah.
What does it generally state for this quote for this sort of section of the city?
I don't have my notes specific to that, but there was a strategic land use update done to their comprehensive plan that talked about and identified this area specifically as a mixed use redevelopment area. And it was simply that. It didn't elaborate any
It
further.
doesn't elaborate beyond that. What's the zoning categories in this general vicinity?
I believe right now there are a mix of, I believe, 3 different zones right now. One is a planned use for, sorry.
No, I'm just Eric's going for it.
We don't have the report in front of us,
Go
but
ahead,
it's a mix of uses right now, and they are in the process of a rezoning as well.
Current zoning, Mr. Trimble, is industrial, A4 residential, planned commercial, and then multifamily housing. I can't remember the code. What area. And the current zoning petition in front of the council is to make the entire area planned commercial.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. The area shown on here as flooding, is that the extent of the 100-year floodplain as shown in St. Louis County GIS?
To the best we could draw it.
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Can you explain for me real quick, just improperly stored materials? Can you give me an example of that?
So we saw multiple locations where it was just stacked, apparently refuse type material. So pallets that had been there for obviously a very long time where vegetation was growing from within them. Places where it was just, loose stacks of lumber. There was a boat apparently stored over by the cell tower located on one of the side streets. There was a broken down van that appeared to have been there for a very long time. But primarily in terms of improperly stored materials, or stacked materials that weren't lifted off the ground that could definitely house vermin and other types of rodents.
And nobody that you could tie that to, like
It would be
responsible party?
on people's properties, but nothing had been done about it, obviously, in a long time.
So no citations for those kinds of things either.
I don't think there are any other questions on this slide from the.
in looking at the original RFP for this property, the city said their primary objective is to remediate conditions that could lead to the area becoming blighted. So is your analysis saying that the entire area is blighted?
Our analysis is saying that it meets the definition of blight for the state statutes.
Are there any of our members on the Zoom that wish to ask a question? Eric, I trust that you're keeping an eye on that, but I'll ask periodically as well.
The members on Zoom have access privileges, so they can pop in.
Okay.
And you should be able to hear.
I think that's all the questions for that slide. Right.
Next slide, please. All right, so I am going to give a brief overview of the cost benefit analysis. So first, I wanted to just delve into what a cost benefit analysis does. So this is looking at tax increment financing over the lifetime of the proposed TIF, and it's calculating the revenues that would continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions, as well as making an estimate of the revenues that would be captured by the TIF for the purposes of the redevelopment. So the table or graph on the left shows essentially TIF revenues over time increasing. So the way a TIF works is once it's established, a baseline amount is set.
I'm sorry. I'm
Sorry.
told that some of the people on Zoom are having a hard time hearing
I'm
you.
gonna have to
So
take
could
this
you
off then.
speak up, please?
I'll take this off. That'll
Okay,
probably
I'm
help.
trying to get closer too. Thank you.
Sorry. Is that better? Should I start over? Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm going to speak about the cost benefit analysis. So the cost benefit analysis looks at the tax increment financing for a proposed redevelopment over the lifetime of a TIF. So the way the TIF works, if you look at the table graph on the left, this essentially shows the revenues over time from a development. A TIF is established and a baseline amount in terms of real property assessed valuation and current sales tax and other economic activity taxes is set when the TIF is approved and activated. From that moment on, for the next 23-year period for each RPA, a portion of those incremental revenues generated beyond that baseline amount are allocated to the TIF. Those revenues include 100% of any net new real property taxes and 50% of any net new economic activity taxes. Those economic activity taxes include things like sales taxes and utility taxes. Again, the timeline for each RPA will be 23 years. And then after that period, the TIF is done and 100% of those revenues will begin to then flow to the taxing jurisdictions again. So before I move on, any questions here? Okay, next slide. So the cost benefit analysis essentially estimates all the future revenues that could be generated for each of the taxing jurisdictions. To set up the cost benefit analysis, we set up both an as-is scenario, which looks at the current condition of the property and makes an assumption of what those properties are likely to do over the next 23 years if TIF is not approved. And then an as-developed scenario, which is looking at the proposed redevelopment and the potential impact it could have over that same 23-year timeline. And then we look at the net impact between those two scenarios to arrive at what the net new or net negative revenues to a taxing jurisdiction could be. And that essentially also helps us estimate the total revenues that the TIF itself could capture over that time. Next slide. So delving into the specific revenue streams, a TIF is eligible to capture payments in lieu of taxes, which again are the incremental real property taxes. 100% of those taxes are eligible for capture by the TIF. There are a couple of exceptions there, including the state property tax. Economic activity taxes, again, are the incremental tax revenues created by retail activity and utility sales. Only 50% of those net new economic activity taxes are eligible for capture by the TIF. Again, there are a couple of exceptions that are excluded from capture. All other tax revenues are not captured by the TIF. They continue to flow to all the taxing jurisdictions. These revenues include the commercial surcharge and the personal property tax.
In addition to all of this, the developer is also considering introducing a community improvement district sales tax of 1%. We've included estimates of what those revenues would be based on our revenues of just general sales within the area. Next slide. I do not believe they have definitively decided whether or not to apply for a community improvement district.
Can you explain to the public what a community improvement district is?
So a community improvement district is essentially a separate economic development tool. It has the power to levy sales taxes as well as essentially property taxes or levies on real property to fund certain activities within that district area or certain improvements in that area.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. All right, so delving into the real property tax rates. The TIF again captures 100% of incremental net new real property taxes. Excluded from this are the state's property tax and the productive living board taxes. Commercial property in Missouri is assessed at 32% of appraised value, and residential real property is assessed at 19% of appraised value. After the assessment is estimated, the tax rate is applied per $100 of assessed value. Next slide, please. The commercial surcharge tax is levied on commercial property. It is not eligible for capture by the TIF, so 100% of those revenues continue to flow to all of the taxing jurisdictions. The tax levy is $1.70 per $100 of assessed value. And then of that, a certain percentage flows to each of the local taxing jurisdictions at the site itself. Next slide, please.
Is an apartment building commercial?
No, it's residential. That was a good question. Personal property taxes are assessed on personal property, for instance, your personal automobile or other random equipment that you may own. The personal property tax rate, again, is not captured by the TIF. Next slide, please. Local sales taxes. So again, sales taxes are considered an economic activity tax. So the TIF can capture 50% of the incremental net new sales tax revenues, except for Prop A transportation, the Children's Service Fund, the Parks Arch Tax, Metrolink, emergency services, and the state sales tax. All other taxes will be eligible for capture by the TIF. Next slide, please. So we have updated our analysis to include 2021 assessed values. The county has just finished up equalizing everything and setting what the 2021 tax rates will be for real property. So I won't read a table to you, but these are the current 2021 assessed valuations for each RPA. And I should mention actually that those, for the assumptions built into our model, we've assumed that those are essentially the base valuations for each RPA. So for example, RPA 1 is assumed to start at the end of this year. So we've used the $1.9 million number you see there. For RPAs 2 and 3, we've applied a nominal inflation growth rate to those RPAs to essentially scale up what that base value would be into the years that they would theoretically commence. Next slide. So getting into the real property assessed valuation for the new development. So we've applied the values you see in the table in front of you to the proposed square footage or number of units for the proposed developments. These valuations are based on a review of similar properties in St. Louis County and what the assessor's office is currently assessing those properties at. Again, for real property, 100% of any of the eligible incremental property taxes will be collected. Commercial surcharge will continue to flow to everybody. Next slide. Personal property, we've applied the following rates to personal property tax or personal property valuations in the model. And again, all of those revenues will continue to flow to their respective taxing jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Base sales estimates, we recently were able to secure the current sales within each RPA to update the model accordingly. So RPA 1, 2, and 3 reflect current data as of the end of 2020. And so we're using that as our stand-in for the base sales in the area to, calculate the incremental sales taxes that would be eligible. Utility sales, we estimated based on a per square foot basis of the buildings in place right now.
Retail sales calculated.
So the base retail sales, actually, the city was able to pull from the state exactly what has been collected in sales tax from each of the operating businesses in the area right now. So that actually reflects the basically the calendar year 2020. I believe it's like February 20 through January 21.
Excellent. Thank you.
So you're welcome. Next slide, please. Projected retail sales, we've included $350 per square foot of restaurant and $250 per square foot of other retail to estimate what the potential for sales in the area could be. And then again, the TIF captures 50% of any net new sales taxes that are, or eligible net new sales taxes generated by those sales. Next slide, please. And utility sales similarly are also eligible for capture by the TIF. I will note that in the cost benefit analysis, we assume that the TIF is not collecting any utility sales tax revenues, just because historically those have been difficult for developers to get the utilities themselves to essentially report what it should be. But for analysis purposes, we've assumed that all of those utility tax revenues will continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions based on those sales in the table. Next slide, please.
Actually, I have a question.
Oh,
on
yeah,
that.
sure.
So are you saying there's an opportunity for the developer to actually hassle the utilities enough to potentially get a portion of those taxes and pay off the TIF earlier? Is that what
No,
you're saying, or is
I
it-
mean,
is that in reverse?
It's not realistic it used to be that the utilities would break out that information. And so if you had, let's say you had a TIF with one or two utility boxes and they could actually physically look at the utility bills, then, I mean, that's the way you have to do it. And so if you have many,
You know, if you have 600 to 800
right,
meters,
there's no way
Got
that
it.
you're going
Yep.
to aggregate utility
Okay.
bills and do the calculation on a scenario like this. And so if there's more than a handful of businesses or residences within a redevelopment area, we don't count on utility taxes.
Okay.
It's administratively impossible without cooperation of the utility companies.
Good.
Next slide, please. All right, so other just things to keep in mind in terms of understanding the cost benefit analysis. We've applied a biannual assessment growth rate of 3%. We've looked at how assessments have grown or declined over time in St. Louis County, and this is about a happy medium of where we are. Some years will be much higher, some years will be lower, but we are essentially graphing a straight line of increase. Sales tax growth rate, we've assumed 2%, which is conservative given, especially now. Stabilized occupancy, we're assuming that all of the retail space will reach stabilized occupancy of 95%. We're also assuming that there are collection fees for real property taxes of 1.5% and a timely payment and collection fee discount of 3% for sales tax collections. Next slide, please. So all in, the TIF itself, which again is the money that would flow to the redevelopment, would capture roughly a gross number of $70.5 million in a present value basis using a 5% discount rate. That's around $35.1 million. The developer is requesting $35 million, and that is in comparison to a total project cost of about $276 million, which gives you a relative ratio of TIF to total cost of 12.7%, which is in line with similar developments in St. Louis that require TIF. Next slide, please. Again, the developer is considering the introduction of a community improvement district. So we went ahead and just projected what those numbers could be based on the sales that are expected. So all in a present value basis, again, a discount rate of 5%. We're looking at approximately $1.7 million in SID revenues. over the same lifetime of the TIF. Next slide, please. So again, Justin mentioned earlier, there are 3 RPAs, redevelopment project areas. Each of these areas have a separate 23-year clock, essentially. So we've looked at each of those RPAs separately to understand what the impact to all of the taxing jurisdictions for the area would be. This is a consolidated table, and it looks at the city of Webster Groves, the school district, the county, and then all of the other metro taxing jurisdictions. So over the lifetime of the TIF, which again is that 23-year period, the city could expect to see, based on the analysis we performed, an increase of $0.7 million. That's a gross number, not a present value number. That's a gross over the lifetime of the TIF. Similarly, the school district for RPA 1, $2.4 million. St. Louis County and the other taxing jurisdictions, 2.5 million and 0.4 million respectively. What's interesting to look at as well is what happens after the TIF expires. So the second column actually shows just for 2045 alone, the year after RPA 1 expires, what those taxing jurisdictions, based on the analysis we have, would expect to see in that year alone. That's 100% of those revenues. So in year 2045, it obviously changes considerably, with the city getting nearly $500,000 in that year alone, the school district at 1.2 million, St. Louis County at 0.7, and the other taxing jurisdictions at 0.1 million. Next slide, please. So similarly, RPA 2, I won't bore you and read each of these numbers, but again, looking at the net new revenues over the lifetime of the 23-year time period. And then again, at the annual post-TIF revenues. So for example, RPA 2 would cease in 2045, beginning in 2046, you're seeing a considerable increase in taxing revenues that would flow to the taxing jurisdictions. Next slide, please. And similarly, RPA 3, same type of table, but again, showing over the lifetime of the TIF, the 23-year time period, you're looking at around $1 million each for the city and the school district, 2.3 million for the county, and 0.6 million for the other metro jurisdictions. And then once that TIF expires, you're seeing a bump in those revenues on an annual basis. So, thank you. So the total impact to the taxing jurisdictions, this is just a combination of those 3 tables over the 23-year time period for each of those RPAs. So I haven't added in any of the years following. City of Webster Groves, 2.6 million. School district, 5 million. St. Louis County, almost $11 million. And the other jurisdictions, 2.3 million. So next slide, please. And with that, I'm sure there will be questions. So I'm welcome to hear it.
Question, for looking back at the impact tables, can you explain why RPA 2 seems to be generating much more than the other 2 RPAs?
Wait, are you looking on the net new revenue?
I'm just
side?
comparing the net new revenues for RPA 2 to
So
1.
RPA 2 is where the office development is. So you are going to see an increase from the commercial surcharge there. And I believe, if I'm remembering the breakout correctly, that's also where the majority of the retail is as well. So you're getting the city and the other taxing jurisdictions continue to get half of those net new revenues from the retail. Right, because you have the surcharge there. So, and the personal property taxes for office space tend to be a little higher too.
Have a total of the post-TIF.
I didn't, because they're in separate years. So I didn't want to further muddy the water because there are growth rates implied there as well.
Okay,
We
makes
could total that and like scale it up to, I think, 2047, 2048, just so it's apples to apples. But I didn't want to overstate or understate anything.
So just so I'm clear then, over 26 years, it's 5 million additional dollars divided by 26, right?
Yeah.
So annualized.
Right. Well, and
half
and
a
remember,
million.
within that 26 years, in year 24, RPA 1 burns off. So there is more on top of that. But I,
Correct.
again, didn't want to confuse things more than necessary. But yes, 5 million in total over those lifetimes.
If
Or-
you, oh, I
Oh,
apologize.
no,
I
go
did not
ahead.
mean to
Oh,
speak over
no,
you.
no, you go ahead.
I just had on an unrelated question. I'm hoping that maybe you can walk me through a little bit. What kind of guarantees are there that that all three phases will be constructed? Because what sort of happens if one phase does not occur?
So that actually falls more into the redevelopment agreement, but, and Mark may be able to speak better towards that than I can.
Well, that's exactly right. That'll be negotiated between the city and the developer as to what are the specific obligations and of the developer with respect to each phase and what are the ramifications. I mean, but I will say that, the project has to be market driven. And so, the developer won't be able to get financing if the lender doesn't believe there's a market for the product, right? And so there are no guarantees that the project would occur on this particular schedule. They have made assumptions regarding absorption, but those are only assumptions.
And will this, I mean, in the city's negotiation with the developer, will this agreement be ready before the TIF commission would be making a vote, or is this subsequent to our sort of decision?
It'll be subsequent.
I have another question on the base sales estimates, just so I'm clear. It says retail sales. That's gross sales, or is that gross tax receipts?
That's gross sales.
Okay.
We actually received the tax information and then using the tax rate, grossed it up to gross.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Could you just briefly mention your experience with TIFs? 23 years is the maximum lifetime.
Right.
Do TIFs end early? What is the experience in
Yeah,
St. Louis
23
TIFs?
years is the maximum lifetime. TIFs can and do end earlier. There are notes issued, and once you've hit that number, whatever that number is agreed upon, the TIF can cease at that point. So there are opportunities where TIFs can pay off early, and then once that happens, those revenues start flowing sooner. So this is in some ways a worst case scenario.
So then the opposite of that scenario, just for clarity, then, if it's not fully paid off by year 23, it's just,
That's it.
that's it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's another option too, where nothing ever happens and you continue to receive whatever revenues you can have been receiving. So.
Right.
You're welcome.
Nothing from our Zoom members. Okay. Are there any other questions from those of us present in the room?
The reason that this is split up into three effectively, I mean, it benefits not the city, it benefits the developer more than anything, right? Because they're allowed additional years. So like, I mean, to answer, I feel like as a rebuttal to what he was saying down there, wouldn't it be easier, encourage the developer to actually go forward with all three things if we put it all into one RPA?
So I think at that point, because of the size and scale of this development, you run into an issue with the market being able to absorb that much product quickly enough and for there to be enough revenue to make it financially feasible at that point. So it's really just a timing issue at that point.
RPA want anyway, so it's not like they're spreading out, like they're incurring costs, but spreading it out into the other RPAs. They're incurring those substantial costs, especially the area-wide utility and remediation and acquisition costs that are part of what they're paying for with the TIF are happening on that front end anyway. So I mean, those costs are incurred, and that from sort of a conceptual way is incentive enough, I think, to continue with the development in order to have the TIF continue to generate revenue, right?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest, I think, complaints, or not complaints, but concerns of the public is that it's not gonna go forward. It starts and then it kind of stops and we're left with what we have at Crestwood, or, half of what Crestwood is. And I think that's a concern of the public as well, is like, even if they're in a favor of this, they're like saying, hey, is this actually gonna be built? And it's like, if it's already losing money or the market isn't there, why put more money in it as a developer? And so the city's kind of like, a creek without a paddle.
Let me just say that having the multiple RPAs in one sense increases the likelihood of the entire development occurring. Because if you start your 23 years now, but as Katie mentioned, the absorption is not quick enough to take advantage of that, then you're decreasing the likelihood that the subsequent buildings get built, because there won't be enough time left on your TIF clock to capture the increment and pay for the subsidy. Okay, so I think in my mind, the phased approach with the redevelopment project areas actually increases the likelihood that the entire thing happens, as opposed to just the initial portion.
Much better said, thank you.
To expound on that too, so based on the chart here, there's the 3 RPAs, and I'm on slide 6, sorry. There's an area wide bucket at 33.8. Would that go into RPA 1, or would that?
So it's listed as area wide. It would essentially occur at the same time as RPA 1. And it's, from our understanding from discussions with the developer, it's primarily those utilities, the new roadways, that kind of work that needs to happen up front, some of the acquisition costs. All of that stuff has to happen at the beginning before any of the other stuff can happen. It makes no financial sense or just construction sense to try to piecemeal it over time.
Okay.
So then I have another question then about the phasing clock. Is the phases start based on the calendar and not based on the developer's mobilization or moving forward with a particular phase?
The 23-year clock for each redevelopment project area starts when the council approves an ordinance for that redevelopment project area. So if the council approves an ordinance for redevelopment project area 2 on January 1, 2023, then you get it would be in place for a maximum of 23 years from that point.
Any other questions? I think we're good on this.
Mr. Chair, if I just really quick. So for all the public, and that is here, and for the members, all of this is on the TIF Commission website. If you click on the Douglas Hill proposed redevelopment area, you'll see all the presentation and the documentation.
Thank you so much.
Okay, our next point of order here in the public hearing is to receive any written comments from the taxing jurisdictions. Mr. Peterson, have we received any written comments?
There have been no comments submitted from the taxing jurisdictions.
Okay, have we received any written comments from the public?
Yes, so the written comments from the public that were received by 4 p.m. Per our guidelines have been distributed to you. They're also on record. And when at the moment that we adjourn the hearing, we will ask that they be entered into the record as exhibits to the hearing.
And those are all the same things that were emailed to us.
That's correct. They were emailed, and you have, for those here, they have print copies as well.
Okay.
And we'll have those on the website as well. So.
At this time, do we have any oral comments from the taxing jurisdictions?
There have been no organizational representatives that have made themselves known to us from the taxing jurisdictions. So we can move to the public unless there are any. I do not see any.
Is there anyone from the taxing jurisdictions here or on Zoom? I'm seeing none. So then we will go ahead and move on to the public comment portion of the public hearing.
So I will, I'll call folks here. David Stokes, you're first, so I'll just let you know to come on up, but I'll walk through some things. For those on Zoom, again, a reminder, please come up, Mr. Stokes. I'll get you to in just a second. For those on Zoom, we have 2 raised hands. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. We will, they'll be in order and we'll alternate between the public and Zoom. I'll set a time clock here for 3 minutes and you'll hear the beeper. And then for those in Zoom, a reminder, your address and name for the record for our clerk here to record. So
And if I may add one more
Mhm.
thing as a reminder in general, we're here to discuss the TIF itself. We're not here to discuss the pros and cons of the development as a whole, whether you're opposed to it or for it. We're talking about the TIF specifically. So I would ask anyone that comments, please keep your comments focused on the topic at hand.
So with that, Mr. Chair, our first is Mr. David Stokes.
Hello, members of this commission. So much to say in 3 minutes. My name is David Stokes. I'm Director of Municipal Policy at the Show Me Institute. We are a free market think tank. I'm here today in opposition to this proposal. This commission, the St. Louis County TIF Commission, in its various groupings as it goes from city to city over the past decade or so, has been one of the very few bodies in our region to push back against the constant overuse and abuse of tax subsidies and tax incentives, rejecting TIFs in cities, which until about 4 years ago, the cities could then just choose to override the TIF, which was of course, could choose to override the TIF commission, which was beyond absurd. Thankfully, a few years ago, there were laws changed to reduce that ability of cities to override a negative rejection from this commission, which I very much hope we will see at some point, perhaps later tonight or in the near future. Where to begin? Can't help it starting off since floodplain came up. It's worth pointing out that in 2 months, it will be illegal to use TIF in the floodplain in St. Louis County, completely illegal for this development to get in under the guise of within 2 months by the developer in the city. It's a very worthwhile and beneficial change to prevent the use of TIF in the floodplain in our county and most of the rest of the state of Missouri. And I think if this development's going to get in ahead of it, well, in a sick way, I would say more power to them. But that's going to be very harmful from an environmental perspective. Much of what we just heard in the presentation is it's just sort of twisted. I'm here to say that, look, the but-for test, the blight designation, the cost benefit analysis, it's all a joke. I mean, you can blight anything in the state of Missouri. You can blight absolutely anything in the state of Missouri. If the developers and the city or county want to do it, you can do it. The but-for test, it's made to sound like some complicated system that it has to pass a very difficult test to prove that it wouldn't go forward without the subsidy. Well, they all passed the but-for test because the planners hired by the developers to say they'll say what they're told to say. So the but-for test is a joke. And as far as the cost-benefit analysis, I noticed many of you were going through those numbers very carefully and good for you for doing so. But there's just gigantic flaws in the whole thing. And let's use the ballpark village analogy. When they did the ballpark village stuff, they said all these things. Well, it won't be for 23 years to get all the tax dollars, but in the meantime, you'll get this and it'll build to that. But what they never say is that when Ballpark Village came on board with its very heavy tax subsidies, they promptly drove out of business a number of other restaurants and bars that were paying full taxes to the city of St. Louis. That is seen over and over in these types of subsidy-laden projects. So there's no calculation in any of this as to how this project, with its tax subsidies, will affect other businesses in this region and the fewer reduced taxes that those businesses, residents and the like, might pay would have paid but would not pay. That's just such a deep flaw in all of this. TIF doesn't work. The East West Gateway Council of Governments, our regional planning agency, is that?
I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap it up in 15 seconds.
Now, TIF doesn't work. The East West Gateway came up with a study several years ago documenting that it was $370,000 of tax subsidies for every job created. That's a road to economic failure. There are many other studies that cite that this level of development through tax subsidies fails to grow an economy, fails to grow jobs. It's just more corporate welfare. It's harmful for our region. This body has said no to developments in the past, and I very much hope that it will say no again. And many more of my comments are in the testimony that's been provided to all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stokes, can I ask you a question? I'm interested in the 800-pound gorilla, which is the statute that was recently passed by the Missouri legislature that would make this technically prohibited if this were done 2 months later. And I want to, one, is your institution lobbying right now to repeal that statute?
No, well, first of all, we're a 501c3, we're a 501c3 organization, so I'm not a registered lobbyist. When I speak in Jefferson City, I'm talking about ideas and the like. So we don't lobby, which sounds like a technical word.
Yeah,
but it's
no, I
important for me.
appreciate that.
No, we very much, I mean, I worked for years to pass some of these changes to empower the St. Louis County TIF Commission and to restrict the use of TIF in the floodplain, and for the many other bills that were passed in the legislation this year. It was originally SB 22, introduced by Senator Koenig. Then at the very end of session, it got passed by being merged at the last minute into another bill. So I forget the name of that bill because it all happened at the end. But what the change is that now in most of Missouri, you cannot use TIF in the floodplain. There are a few exceptions.
Can we stop there? We have a lot of people that need to go. And I don't want to take everybody else's time. And I think we understand the kind of legacy of the legislation. So I don't want to continue and
That's
give
fine.
you extra time when we're not going to give extra time to other people.
I asked a question. It's not,
And
that's
we
fine.
will, we will have time for more discussion amongst the commission on any of these matters.
I'd be happy to follow up with the commission in writing and further answer to that question.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Frank. Thank you, Earl.
Our next speaker will be on Zoom. It's Drew Behrens. And if you're speaking on Zoom, you do not need to worry about your camera. It'll just be audio. So Drew, go ahead and unmute and then you can start speaking. Drew, if you unmute Drew, you can begin. Mr. Chair, I just suggest we move to the next one then if we'll.
Okay, yeah, we can come back to him and try him again.
All right, so I have a Thomas Schultz on Zoom. Who would be next? So Thomas, go ahead and unmute and you can speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Sure.
All right, I live at 433 Foot Avenue, and I was wondering, just a simple question. How does our city and the developers justify the use of this TIF for this development when doing so, as the previous speaker said, will be illegal in 2 months due to significant risk to human safety and negative environmental impacts? And if you do approve this, second question is, would you be willing, would you advocate for getting the consent of the people it would impact through a public vote? And that's it. Thank you.
Just get your address again before you leave us.
433 Foot Avenue.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ed Scholl. Will be followed by Dave Buck. Ed?
Ed, are you here?
Okay, Dave Buck, followed by Emily Shepard.
Eric, were there only 2 people on Zoom who had their hand raised? Okay, thank you.
Dave Buck, 124 South Elm. I've been a resident in Western Groves for 20 years, and I want to tip my hat to the Collaborative, Development Strategies, the TIF Commission, Plan Commission, and the City Council. Everybody who's had a hand in this. Per the chairman's direction, I'm not going to talk about my preference for or against the development project. I've already done that to the Plan Commission and to City Council. The thing I do want to talk about, and I am not a developer, I'm not a finance guy, but I have watched every one of your meetings and heard every word that's been spoken by not only you, but also the resources that you imply. I have not heard the word risk mentioned by anybody. And in my career, I was involved in many major programs, like building a $100 million pet food plant in Nevada. It's a big project. But we always did a risk assessment, a risk analysis, because any major project of that magnitude is all about managing risk. And I haven't heard anybody talk about risk, including development strategies. And I'm just saying, if I was in your shoes, and I'm just a layman, there's no way I would sign off on any numbers or TIF without knowing the risk. Because every project has risk, and you gotta believe this one has risk as well. And you better nail it down and know what it is. Thanks.
Next speaker is Emily Shepherd, followed by Bud Belomo.
Good evening. My name is Emily Shepard. I live at 411 Oak Street, very near the proposed site. Thank you for volunteering to serve on this TIF commission. I know it's a big job, it's very time consuming, and it's very important. So thank you. I do not support this TIF proposal. If this were a project that did not include the floodplain and were truly for the public good, including public infrastructure and true affordable housing, I would likely support a smaller TIF. But that is not what is before you. I do not support using tax dollars to purchase private property for the benefit of a private developer. I do not support trying to push through a TIF in a floodplain to beat the clock on the new law. Pacific and Kirkham are part of our neighborhood. We walk to the sculpture park, gymnastics, Rolling Ridge. Our front door is from Webster Window and Door, and they have a beautiful showroom off of Pacific. I understand that there is a specific definition for blight for the purposes of the TIF. And I also understand that that can be used to categorize almost any property as blighted. This area is not blighted, even by the TIF definition. There have been no citations from the city. In fact, this area has not had the city maintenance and beautification that we see in other areas of Webster. And despite that lack of support, the gym center, church, Annex apartments, and businesses on both Pacific and Gore have all had renovations and remodeling, hundreds of thousands of dollars. While the project would increase the population of Webster, I don't know that it would increase the population of the county overall. And I don't know that sales tax or sales revenue would also increase in the county overall. It might just be central, some might just be happening in this district instead of other places, which would essentially make a decrease in tax revenue outside of the district, resulting in tax revenue going towards the private project rather than towards the taxing districts where it goes now. As I understand it from the slides with development strategies and the developer, about $20 million will be used for property acquisition. Private property to be purchased with tax dollars and then owned by a private developer. It just doesn't seem right to me. And much of the remaining $35 million would be infrastructure, but some of that is only needed because of this project. But for this project, there would be no need for the new street or underground water catchment. What are we all getting for the $35 million in tax increment financing over 23 years? Is it helping us meet our goals as a city and a region? Even if the money turns out to be good and it's debatable, that's what is best for all of us? I don't believe that it is. This is a big decision for our city, county, school district, and other taxing districts, and I know there are many things for you to work through. I ask that you not recommend a TIF for this project. Thank you.
Next will be Bud Belomo, followed by Stephen Musial on Zoom.
I shortened mine a little bit because I can't talk about project whether or not for it, but I'm for the TIF. Okay, so first, how's that? Okay, I can take this off. Not taking my glasses off. First, I want to thank you for your work, your dedication to this big job, whether or not we're going to approve a TIF. I'm in full support of the TIF for the Douglas Hill project. Without which, if this doesn't go through, obviously the project is dead. So I'm going to cut out some of the other stuff that I'll say for another time. But just to reiterate, if approved, the TIF will not be a cost to the city. And in fact, the city, the school district, the library, and other taxing jurisdictions would receive additions and new tax revenues during the 23-year life of the TIF. After the TIF expires, those new tax revenues would increase significantly on an annual basis in perpetuity. Millions of dollars in tax revenues into the future are what's at stake here and will not be realized if this redevelopment does not happen. Lastly, in my view, and others have told me this, if this is not, if the TIF is not approved, development doesn't happen, there's probably zero chance of anybody else coming in, okay? I say this based on three factors. First, the city initiated a request for proposals when I was on the city council then. From proposals a few years ago, we had only one response that submitted a full RFP, and that happens to be a person that lives here in the city, as you know. Second, by a new state law that was just spoken about the floodplain, after January 1st, any developer will see no chance of getting a TIF, obviously, and probably no chance of getting government subsidies in any way to do another development. And third, which hurts me a lot to hear it in our community, the negative publicity that's been going about this whole thing over the last few months, especially. It's just sad to see that. And the consequence of that, though, is other developers are going to see that as well. They'll never want to come here to Webster Groves and do anything by reputation. You can't blame them. So I'm in full support of the TIF. I hope you approve it. And I hope to see you later to talk about the next steps. Thank you.
Next will be Stephen Musial from Zoom. Stephen, go ahead and unmute and you can address the commission.
I would just like to make 2 points, please, to reiterate upon Mr. Buck's point about the risk analysis. This project is fatally flawed. The traffic analysis does not take into account the trains. And so to put TIF money into this when we don't have all the information is throwing good money after bad. Who's to say that people are going to move in? The word's going to get around. You can't get into this place. You can't get in or out of it. It's a nightmare. And so why should we move in? The second point is to Mr. Balamo just talking. There were actually 2 submissions for the RFP. With the other was by Novus, and it was all on top of the hill. Did not have anything to do with the Shady Creek area. It was everything along Pacific where it made sense. And that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Musial, if you're still there, can we get your address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. 559 Brainerd Place.
Thank you. David Yates will be next, followed by Ann Yard.
Good evening. This is Dave Yates. Thank you, TIF Commission members, for taking your time and volunteering it, for being on the panel. Why TIF? If the investors in this development can't fund it outright, why do it in the first place, or scale it back? The properties in the project area are not blighted. I don't agree with the definitions there, especially maybe the recycling center formal parcel that could be built on and improved. The primary need right now in that area is the need to improve the streets, sidewalk, accessibility, landscaping, and lighting after dark. Those can be easily done by the city. Additionally, racing against the December 31st deadline, after which TIF funding is prohibited in the floodways, is disingenuous and is not at all in the spirit of legislation. What most concerns me are that some of the appointments to the TIF Commission and their seeming lack of impartiality. Mr. Wilson, as development-focused architect, is more than qualified to sit on a TIF commission of this type, but not this one for Douglas Hill. As former managing director of HCA, design architect for Douglas Hill, I see this as a big conflict of interest. In Mr. Wilson's interview to be seated on the commission, he spoke of having the right to not care when deliberating a TIF request. Let's all be mindful as we move forward that we listen to Mr. Wilson and hold him to his declared neutrality. I also find Mark Hinkle's appointment to the commission to be in conflict. Mr. Hinkle's lauded brand of Alvin Oak restaurants were developed with Green Street, the G and SG Collaborative. Undoubtedly, a rapport was built between Mr. Hinkle, Mr. Hulse, and the rest of the development team that would have helped sway opinion to voting yes to this TIF at Douglas Hill. Again, I ask City Council and Webster citizens, listen closely to Mr. Hinkle's words as the TIF is debated. Thank you.
Next is Ann Yard, followed by Carolyn Fan.
I'm Ann Yard. I live at 465 Oak Street. Development Strategies, the independent consultant hired by the city and paid by SG, has consistently struggled to present a convincing picture of a blighted area in their TIF presentation. Several of us watching the first meeting when they attempted to do this literally laughed out loud at the photographs showing supposed evidence of blight. The conditions cited could be found in many places all about town, including established areas no one would think about calling blighted, as well as our own backyards. There is one property that I can think of that might fit the definition of blight. If that single property was being developed and TIF requested, I believe I'd be in favor, especially if the project included a robust affordable housing component. The problem with this TIF, as with so many aspects of this project, is that the developer wants to overdevelop the area. They don't want to pick out the parcels that are truly blighted, stay on the Pacific Avenue footprint, and develop those. They want the whole enchilada, all 15 acres, even if some of it's in a floodplain and almost none of it is truly blighted. So you're in the position of rushing something through that will be illegal in 2 months and dooming businesses that are in the way because these developers don't know how to pare it down. If you were just looking at Red Lemoore, would you agree it was blighted? This area is the sum of its parts. Honestly, I don't know how you can, in good conscience, approve this.
Next speaking is Carolyn Fan, followed by Ed Scholl.
Hi, Caroline Fan, 19 Clydehurst Drive. One, I want to thank everyone who's serving on the commission. I think you guys have asked really valid questions. This is only my second ever type of TIF commission meeting. I had attended all the city ones, and those were very rancorous. And so I'd like to thank everyone here for being very polite. So my questions about this, and I did actually drive around the RPA, and I did not personally see anything that I thought was really blighted. And then the other thing is, I think the signs that are announcing this are kind of tilted and hard to read. The other thing is, as someone who is 40, I don't really know anyone under 50 who reads the Webster Kirkwood Times. So, well, you seem to be highly knowledgeable, but that's just frankly like, so when I talk to my elderly neighbors about it, they're like, oh, there's been like all kinds of debate about it in this newspaper that I don't read. So my question is, does it meet the but-for? And then also the other consideration is that Webster is a pool municipality, right? So I kind of feel like we're just kind of moving the money around the county and then taking money out of other parts of the county. I'm very, very concerned about the floodplain issue, and I think that is where my main objection to this resides. We actually, my husband and I voted to keep the multi-unit housing. It was a very confusing initiative because the mailer said vote yes for no and no for yes, but we want to see more families. I just don't know that this meets the requirements. Thanks.
Ed Scholl. Mr. Chair, this is our last submitted slip. And then, so I don't see Mr. Scholl approaching. So, oh, there he is. And we have another slip coming, so. You can go right ahead after you drop it off, and thank you. This is Troy Gordon.
Mayor with us? Hi, my name is Troy Gordon. I'm a 31-year resident of Webster Groves, and I have some questions regarding the financials. I don't know if this is appropriate under the TIF statute, but I was curious if you had pro forma financials from the developer, if you knew what the details were of its equity investors, lenders, et cetera. I think that's important if you don't have it to get it. I'm sure the developer would cooperate because they need you right now. But it would be significant, I think, to see how they get their money back. And if this were a private development, of course, you wouldn't care. But they're asking you to be their partner. And as the fiduciaries for the citizens of Webster, we indirectly are their partner. So we've seen what the city will get, but what does the developer get? What do the equity investors get? What kind of internal rate of return are the investors getting? When do they get their money back? What kind of developer fee does the developer get? I would tend to think that Mr. Buck's question is right. It's risk. So you're the last money in. If I understood the presentation correctly, there's a $35 million gap, and that's going to be supplied by you if you grant this and the city council approves. So what are you getting for that $35 million benefit? We wait 23 years to get any meaningful return on our investment. What do they get in the meantime? Those are the questions I think you should be asking yourself. I hope if the project's approved, I hope it succeeds. If it does, they'll make a lot of money and we'll get tax returns, tax benefits over the 23-year period forward. But since you're the last money in, so to speak, I think you should see if you're getting an adequate return for the risk that you're taking. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any other cards, so we do need to just make one final call before we move to a motion on the hearing for anyone to raise their hand or to submit a card that wishes to speak.
I will make one final call for any more public comments, either here live in the room or on the Zoom meeting.
We do have Mr. Ed Scholl, if he's here, can speak.
Did we ever try the gentleman who did not unmute himself?
He lowered his hand. We do have two hands that have gone up here. So we'll, I have Rala guy. So go ahead, please. And we need your name and address.
Hi, my name is Dave Lawler, 201 Innisfield Drive. And I apologize. I just got off a plane and tried to and logged into this, so I haven't heard anybody else's comments. I just want to point out that the analysis that was put out has been revised twice in the last 2 days, the most recent this morning, at some point today. I think it still has some flaws. I don't think the numbers are what they are saying they are, but obviously since it was just released this morning or at some point today, I've not had a chance to look at them and analyze them again. I'm sorry, I run through the airport so I could get service to get on. Additionally, what the report, the cost benefit analysis does not take into account is the shifting of tax dollars from other municipalities, other entities. You know, $1 spent to this development is a loss of sales tax revenue for St. Louis County. And I have not found in the analysis anywhere this is addressed. So I think all that needs to be addressed. We need to look at where the tax dollars, wherever sales are going to come from and how that's going to really affect the other taxing entities. Because right now it just looks like, oh, great, we got all this new money from this development, but it's not taking into account that the sales that are occurring in that development would have occurred somewhere else, and that the personal property taxes that are coming from this development would have been paid somewhere else in St. Louis County. So before anything goes up further, I think that all needs to be rectified and we get a true picture of what's this going to do for tax revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lover, and we do have your written testimony regarding that as well.
Brian, did you get his name and address?
Yes, that's Dave Lover.
All right.
So we do have that. Yep. Chuck Shepard is next, followed by Larry Chapman.
Yes, I'm Chuck Shepard at 411 M Street. So what I'm going to say is just a really short version of what I wrote. So tonight we saw a big, huge slide presentation from Development Strategies. It was called a cost benefit analysis, but what it really did was it provided all the revenues, all the benefits, but it didn't provide the costs. So if we're adding 1,000 to 2,000 new residents, those will use city services, county services. There'll be some more students in the schools and stuff. Well, obviously the cost is not zero, it's more than that. So my question for all of you is something I hope you keep in account is when you're making this calculation, include those costs, whatever you think they are. Like a police visit might cost a certain amount of dollars on average. I know a new student on average costs more than $11,000 per year to educate. And so please just include it in that analysis so you can determine whether or not this TIF is advantageous for whichever entity and us as residents who are paying for the bill in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Next is Larry Chapman representing Self.
Good evening. My name's Larry Chapman. I am the developer, but I'm also a resident of Webster Groves. And I'm really kind of speaking on my behalf. I want to say a couple of things. A lot has been said, not a lot of time to respond here, but when you think about the blighting analysis, the gentleman from the Show Me Institute showed up here and basically said you can blight anything under the Missouri statute. And he's exactly right. It's a box checking exercise like we talked about before. And the reason he stood up here is the Show Me Institute is all about trying to kill every economic development program in the state any way they can. They spend all their time talking to people about doing that, and that's just their job. In terms of the questions about the return analysis that we're going to get, all of that was submitted to the city. All of that's available to you. Anybody can look at it, and there's no secrets in any of that stuff. It's completely available. As for surrounding sales in the neighborhood, chambers come out for this. They realize that the real economic benefit here isn't the numbers on that screen. That's some future taxes you're going to get. The real economic benefit here is 1,500 new people moving in here, spending their money and bringing their friends and family to spend money here too. It's churning up and really exercising and making all the businesses a lot more successful, including the ones that are here today. That's why they're here. And in terms of the city services, if you look at this benefit analysis that the development strategy said, it goes through all of those analyses and shows exactly what those impacts are. And so if you have the time to read the entire reports that they've done, you should, because all these things that people are questioning are in there. And I think you'll find the results pretty doggone good. Anyway, that's what I had to say tonight. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. When the public hearing concludes, are we going to have discussion?
We can have discussion today and in the future.
Okay. And that can include the developer? Or should I just ask Mr. Chapman a question right now?
I would, let's close, he was there speaking as a resident. So
Sure.
let's close the public hearing and then we can get into the discussion. I mean, he can answer questions during the
Yes.
discussion, correct? Yes, okay. All right, I'm gonna do one more last call in the room and on the Zoom.
Mr. Chair, I just want to announce Ed Scholl if you're here. Just one more time. Ed,
There you go.
there you go. Come on up.
I want to say thank you to the commission for your work. I know that you have a difficult job ahead of you in understanding and trying to figure out whether or not a TIF is appropriate for this particular development. I lived in Webster Groves for 10 years. I'm a retired commercial banker. I spent 48 years in the business financing commercial properties. A projection is someone's best guess. And I can tell you that over my years of experience, they never come out exactly the same. Some are better, some are worse. And my challenge to you is to totally vet these numbers and to understand what happens if they don't perform. Hopefully, if the TIF is approved and they go forward, we have a wonderful project. But there's also the downside of every project. Please analyze the potential downside before you come to your decision. And take into consideration what the overall risk is to our community and to our business district and to our local businesses that are here in Webster Roads existing right now. I'm glad I don't have your job. It's going to be a difficult job, but please analyze these numbers, question these numbers, because they are the developer's best guess. And I think that he would not have prepared this presentation for you if he did not feel that this project should go forward and would be a benefit to him and also to the citizens of Webster Groves, our constituents. Please check the numbers, please vet them, please ask questions, because there is always a downside and an upside, but they will not come in exactly as they're presented to you. There will be some variances. Thank you.
My final call. Anyone? Yeah, final.
No, he lowered his hand.
Okay, so we have no further persons indicating a desire to speak in the public hearing. I request a motion to adjourn the public hearing and enter relevant documents as exhibits for the hearing. Can I get a motion, please?
Moved. Second from McKenna.
You okay if I read the documents for the record so that?
Yeah.
Sure thing. So the documents that staff is recommending to enter in as exhibits, the presentation from Development Strategies presented tonight dated October 27th, the revised cost benefit analysis dated October 27th, the letter to the TIF Commission from Larry Chapman of SG Collaborative dated October 25th, all written comments submitted to the TIF Commission, and all oral testimony received by the commission at this hearing.
Is there any discussion about the comments that we've gotten from the public hearing?
On the motion to adjourn.
What's that?
Motion, we need to
Any
vote
comments on the motion to adjourn?
the hearing.
Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the public hearing is adjourned. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, discussion and possible action on the TIF Commission resolution. I don't think there's any intent to take any action this evening, only discussion. So members, we have heard the public input on the proposed TIF for the Douglas Hill redevelopment. We have before us the draft resolution for our consideration. Do we wish to begin conversation on this tonight? Give it some guesses.
Mr. Chair, just want to clarify for the people that showed up today to give their testimony for or against, I just hope that they have an opportunity to hear from Mr. Chapman answers to their questions. If the commission thinks that the timeline is going to be amended, or we're going to have several more public meetings where these things can be vetted and aired out, great, then I don't need to push this on any further, but that's just my thought on this.
So I would say that I think we still have a little bit of time, and while Mr. Chapman is here and others are tuned in, I think we can have a little bit of discussion this evening, and then come back on the 10th for further discussion after we've all had time to digest both the comments and the documents, and take action at that time. Okay. So if do we need to do anything to proceed with discussion?
No, it's a sort of an open conversation. You have the resolution that is a staff draft for you. You can talk about that. You can ask questions of the developer or development strategies if you have follow-up in that regard to Mr. McKenna's point and want to clarify certain issues. And then just also for the commission members to be aware, the council obviously has zoning issues in front of them and has also directed staff to schedule a sort of a wide-ranging community engagement plan for not just TIF or not just zoning, but the whole project, not in this plenary type of session with 3 minutes speaking at, but rather try to find a more a dialogue meeting filled type of environment. So I just to give you a sense of the public engagement that will be continuing throughout consideration of the processes.
Much appreciated.
So Kevin, if you'd like, if you have questions, I think we can dive right in.
Sure. I just want to first clarify, there has been no formal written, oral, any type of a statement or position given to this commission from the school districts. Is that correct? Mr. Peterson?
That is correct. We have not received anything formal.
Okay. I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Sort of follow up on that. Is that something we would anticipate?
So, and I'll turn to Mr. Grimm here. Certainly, I don't want to speak for the school district. School district can opine as they wish to the commission. They do, because of the taxing jurisdiction nature of the school district, have seats on the commission for that reason. So I would assume that ahead of any vote, the district would begin to formulate where it is at. There's no secret that the city has had conversations with the school district because we obviously will be negotiating a development agreement with SG Collaborative should this move forward, and so want to involve our community partners. So I would turn to Mr. Addison or Ms. Frazier if they have anything further to say and to clarify anything, but I don't think there's an expectation, but I would expect that their votes would be informed by the school district's position.
Yeah, if I can just add, you are absolutely correct, Mr. Peterson. We're still in trying to work through all of the financial impact of the TIF, and we've been talking with the city about those implications. So we're just not ready to issue a formal letter at this time.
Pam, is there any timeline that you have for, I mean, I guess my question is, will we be getting your opinion prior to the next meeting? Or will we?
That is the goal, yes.
Doesn't look very up.
I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Chapman to address the two comments about the risk. I think they were both really good questions. And I think what I'd sort of like to hear is the good, the bad, and the possible. I mean,
right.
I think people are interested. What if this doesn't go according to plan?
So first of all, one of the reasons I'm a proponent of the use of TIF, tax increment financing, is because it's a tool by which municipal governments who'd like to see an area improved can do it, not using their own money. At any time, the city of Webster Groves could float a bond issue, fix this area, and put it out for development to developers. They could just do that. And a lot of communities around the country do just that. But most communities can't. They don't have the budget. They don't have the resources, human resources, and otherwise even manage a project like that. So they reach out and they create these public-private partnerships, which is what a TIF is. And what they do is they say, listen, we want to see this happen. We're going to agree on what it is. And then we will allow you to capture the new taxes that you generate, nothing we have today, protect the tax base that we have today. And if you're successful, you'll get repaid. And the reality is that we provide finance letters in these books. It says we have people out there ready to finance our projects. We can't do much more than that because guess what? If we don't have the TIF, it's not financeable. But when we have the TIF, we have someone that says, I'm ready to finance it. So we do those kinds of things. We fully anticipate what the market will be, and we will go do that full on board. And we put the improvements and the investment that the city wants to see really up front. It's the infrastructure that's the most important investment. If somehow I don't build a building, someone will come along and build that building. And if I don't build enough of the buildings to repay my TIF, guess who loses? Me. So the idea is to set this up so that it'll react to the market, which is why that phasing is in there. Mark's exactly right. If you've got a clock ticking away, each project becomes harder and harder and harder and harder to finance. The financing resources can't wrap their heads around it. And so, in my opinion, we're taking a huge risk. We're investing our $35 million, really $55 million, with the belief that we'll be able to finance these projects and get this done just the way we've outlined it. Will it change a little bit based on market conditions? Sure. But will it look generally like what's there? Yes, because we're going to have a zoning ordinance and a zoning comprehensive plan that says that's what we can build, and we can't change it without coming back and doing all this over again. So I think that, and then you got to look at the track record of who's here. I've been doing this for 42 years. My partner Phil's been doing it for 35, 6 or 7 years. I don't even know anymore. And if you go back and look at our reputations, you'll see that we have a pretty good track record on delivering what we said we would do. And that's kind of what you have to do. That is the due diligence that you need to do. And development strategies did look at all of our numbers. They shared all of our returns. In fact, they were worried that our returns were a little bit skinny, and they kind of were. But then they were looking at it in the context slice of what, we had super high prices in construction materials a few months ago. Well, guess what? A lot of that's come down. It's starting to get back to normal. We live in long periods of time, 5-year periods of time. Lots of stuff happens in 5 years. We will go up and down and ride the wave for sure. But will we get there? Yeah, that's what we make a living doing, riding these waves and delivering on the promises that we make as very best we can. And we're doing the investment and we're taking the financial and monetary risk. I don't know how to answer it any differently than that, Clark.
Maybe add one point to that. So just to clarify and make sure everybody's on the same page. The city doesn't write a check for $35 million or any portion of $35 million up front. The developer and the developer's lenders build the project. and essentially receives an IOU from the city. And the redevelopment agreement will say, if you build this and if it generates new tax revenues, then you will be reimbursed for a portion of the eligible project costs. So the city and the other taxing districts are not financially obligated toward the TIF. The TIF's payable, as Mr. Chapman said, TIF's payable solely from any incremental tax revenues that are generated.
So I did have a question.
Yes, sir.
So I noticed, the retail, office, restaurant are in square footages, and then the apartment, condos, and townhomes are by units. What roughly, how many square feet in total are the apartments, condos, and townhomes? I'm not asking you
Total,
the exact number, but
it's over 1 million square feet.
Okay.
I don't have the exact numbers in my head. And one of the things that happens is, we're going to get into the market, and the reason there's a range of units is some markets, they go smaller units and more, other markets, they go fewer units and bigger. And we just don't know where this market's going to take us yet.
My question might be better suited towards the city. There was a talk about an RFP, and I was just hoping we could get some clarification on that. Got brought up a couple times. Was Mr. Chapman's group responding to the RFP? Was that a completely separate process? And how many responses were there?
So there was only one response responsive to the RFP. There was the one that was submitted that was a partial that was not responsive. There was an invitation that was put out in order to make sure that we were in a position where we could meet the requirements of TIF. There was, long before that happened, there was a long process that involved vetting a number of developers in the St. Louis area on this particular project. The city engaged a consultant who assisted them in meeting with developers, and they were all told what the project was, what we were thinking of, the area that we were thinking of. Of the 10 that were the top 10 that were identified, the only one who actually submitted an RFP was Mr. Chapman's group. And then he, of course, affiliated with Mr. Hulse's group, who was also in that top 15 group that we were going to talk to. So the interest that was out there was indicated by Mr. Chapman, and only by Mr. Chapman as we first began. But once TIF then came into the conversation, then we had to actually put out a different type of RFP, which is what we did. But the only response that was consistent with the RFP was Mr. Chapman's. Does that answer your question?
The other RFP you put out after the TIF got involved, same thing, only one response?
Yes. Well, so the RFP that had 2 responses was the one that came out after TIF was now involved in the conversation. So the initial conversations with potential developers took place. Then at that point, the question was, what are you going to need to do this? They said TIF. At that point, in order to do that, we had to have a written RFP of a different sort, which is what went out. That then went out to everybody, went out to the world. There were 2 responses to it, Mr. Chapman's and the other one, which was non-conforming. It did not address the area that was supposed to be addressed.
Thanks for the clarification. Appreciate it.
If I may just involve Mr. Grimm here for the purposes of the commission, talking about risk again, and Mr. Grimm, if you could, you obviously addressed the development agreement, but the city's fiduciary interest is still borne by the council and through the commissions and its bodies and its staff to assess the risk ongoing and to also look at other potential measures in the development agreement that may mitigate the risk. Are we correct in stating that? And that if the city wishes to ask for another group such as development strategies to assess risk and help us analyze that, we certainly could, but that is at the city's discretion, correct?
Yeah, so after, and I think Mr. McKenna asked this question or maybe Mr. Trimble about the timing of the redevelopment agreement. So we really have not started having discussion. Well, we haven't had discussions at all with the developer between the city and the developer regarding the redevelopment agreement. But based on my experience, I will tell you that the redevelopment agreement will cover things that, what are the developer's obligations? What are the timing of the developer's obligations to perform? What's the assistance that will be provided to the developer? Is there, what provisions, if any, are what agreements, if any, are between the city and the school district, or between the city and the other property taxing districts? And so is there going to be an opportunity for a limit on the rate of return that can be provided? And the answer is, we have discussed that there would be provisions in the redevelopment agreement to ensure that the project is not over subsidized, if you will. What are the types of provisions for, MBE and WBE participation, workforce housing? All of those types of provisions will be incorporated into the redevelopment agreement, which is yet to be negotiated.
Is that typical of a TIF type project where redevelopment agreement happens after TIF is approved or recommended?
It is. So the redevelopment plan sets out the framework for the redevelopment project, but then there's many provisions that still have to be negotiated between the city and the developer if this council decides to go forward with TIF. But yes, it is typical that occurs after the TIF commission process.
And that does not have to happen by the end of the year. That's something that could go into.
That's correct.
2022.
That's correct.
Is there any amount of change to the plan that would have to occur before the TIF would no longer make sense because it was no longer what was presented to this commission?
Yeah, so the statute provides that if there are if there's a change in the quote nature of the redevelopment project, then that needs to come back to the TIF commission. So just by way of example, let's assume that that you were presented with a redevelopment plan that showed office and commercial and retail and not residential. And then the 6 months from now, there was the developer proposes to construct, have a residential component. That, in my opinion, would be a change in the nature of the redevelopment project that would require reconvening the TIF commission and having a new public hearing. So if you're going from 750 residential units to 700 units or 800 units, that's probably not a change in the quote nature of the redevelopment project. And so frequently we're asked to evaluate, well, does this need to go back to the TIF commission? But so you can kind of get a sense for that, though, of what are the types of changes. But yes, if there is substantial changes to what's been presented to you, it would require coming back to the TIF commission.
And that's not like a revision, that's an entirely new process. So if they came back, then the floodplain legislation would affect them negatively. Is that?
I actually haven't looked at that.
Okay.
I don't want to wing it on that question, but the statute provides that you can make minor changes to the plan by providing notice to all the taxing districts so that the taxing districts then would have an opportunity to come and address the city council before any changes at all are approved to the redevelopment plan. But then the concept of the statute is if there's substantial changes to the plan, that it would go back through the whole TIF commission process again.
So like whether it's a minor or major change requiring coming back to the TIF commission.
Well, initially, I think the city attorney and city council would make that determination.
All right. And then obviously anyone that would have standing could take legal action.
And just to confirm, I think I've asked the question once before. I was trying to pull this up here. Hypothetically speaking, if we do not recommend this TIF before the end of the year, a future TIF could still be feasible for the area up to the floodplain. Is that correct? And that's like the FEMA, actually the 100-year zone or whatever.
Correct.
Okay.
So then the improvements under Gore, the planned improvements under Gore to alleviate choke point that is causing, per Stock's letter, causing the flooding along Kirkham would then not be able to be financed via TIF, correct?
Right. I mean, so the redevelopment area, the TIF redevelopment area could not include property within a floodplain. So obviously it begs the question whether the project is feasible at that point, but legally, but you're correct. That after January 1st or after December 31st, a TIF redevelopment area could not include that property.
And so that particular development or that particular aspect of the development would be gone. Like the culvert expansion.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I see on that site plan, that the majority of this development is not actually within the boundary of the current 100-year floodplain. I mean, a couple of those townhomes on the corner, Stock's letter says that the floodplain elevation is decreased there. I mean, I'm still curious to see how that all plays out in the corner, but per Stock's letter, a lot of design is being put in, and a lot of the phase 1 costs include alleviation of the flooding issues. I know there's a lot of concern about the flooding. I don't know if Larry wants to talk any more about that, but from where I see it, when I look at the site plan, that's why I asked the question on the light map of the extent of the flooding. It seems to me that significant portion of the TIF revenues for phase 1 are going to alleviate through the design and construction, and we potentially would give that up if we delayed this in the future, where there could be development but no improvement of this culvert in the floor. Anyone feel free to correct me if I'm misinterpreting that.
Is that a question?
I mean, that's my analysis of what having gone through all this, having looked at the plans, having understood, the hydrology, having seen what's happened down there and having understood what's being proposed. That's how I'm understanding this. So if there's anyone else on this commission who understands it differently, please speak up, or please rebut or reply.
You're correct.
Do any of our Zoom members have anything they want to add in the discussion? I mean, it's 5 minutes till 8. We will come back on the 10th. We have 2 weeks to review the documentation that we've got, to go through the numbers, to think deeply on this, to prepare any further questions or discussions for the 10th. So unless anyone else has anything else, Larry, you're back at the podium.
I just have one quick question. It was very hard to hear a lot of people talking, and I know someone asked me to respond to questions. So if you have them, I'd be happy to respond to them. That's all.
Question for you, Mr. Chapman. Have you done any sort of analysis? I heard from several speakers about concerns about basically displacing taxes, that this development would simply just sort of generate taxes, but it would be because economic development that would be occurring in sort of other areas are simply now being sort of concentrated into your development. Have you done any sort of analysis, or do you have any sort of rebuttal or say about that?
Well, I don't agree with that. First of all, there's nothing significantly large and game changing about any one of our economic analysis. Now, you could argue that maybe someone moving to apartment here might not move to an apartment somewhere else, but that same their same economic activity would come here. We're trying to fill a gap in Webster. There's no place for somebody to move into an apartment with modern amenities in Webster Groves at all. There's no place for me when I want to get out of my old house to move into a condo or an apartment, so I don't have to take care of this stuff in Webster Groves at all. And so I think we're supplying something that wants to be in Webster Groves anyway. I don't think we're hurting anyone. And it's not like we're putting in a Costco or Walmart that's going to draw things from all over the place. Each and everything we do is so localized that it would be no different than somebody opening a store anywhere. I really just don't believe it's that significant. I do think it helps the local businesses quite a bit.
I had a question about, there were a handful of questions provided by people that were on Zoom in the Q&A portion of the Zoom app. And I was wondering if those are also submitted or you know, or
Yeah, Madam.
how those are addressed.
So, Ms. Roberts, those will, Webster Groves traditional practices, we do not use the Q&A for, because the public hearing is a listening session. Those will be taken by staff, and I was going to get to this, but compiled with any other questions you have, so that as we've done with the zoning process, if you have a question, what does the development agreement look? What are the steps in that? Send those questions to us. We then prepare a response from a staff level on to answer that question. Or involve our partners. We had one on the zoning question about the school district revenue. So we've referred that to the school district. So they will be addressed, but we generally do not engage in the back and forth online during the process.
That's fine. When you address them, will the commission also receive the responses to those questions? Okay.
Yes, they will be addressed to the commission, in fact, so and then made public.
Great. Okay.
Actually, going back with that Q&A, so we've adjourned the public hearing. Is the portal for comments still open then, that people can continue to submit comments?
Absolutely. So they're no different than the city council. The hearing record is now set. You've adjourned the hearing. So that record is set, but all the comments and those things received are part of the TIF minutes, and, you know, we'll live with the TIF commission's actions and such, such as the zoning action. The hearing is adjourned. There's a record there, but then there are minutes, the remarks of visitors that happen at city council and such. So all those questions and things will be part of the official record of the overall TIF commission.
Okay. So we can encourage.
Absolutely. We are not taking down the email address. Folks can continue to send comments to you. It's just recorded in a different spot within the TIF world.
Okay, very good. Is there any other discussion this evening, or are we ready to adjourn to study all these materials and come back in 2 weeks?
Adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second, Hample. Prior to the vote, I just want to remind members, the meeting on the 10th is back at City Hall. We don't have court that night, so we will be at City Hall
Thank you
or
very
on
much
Zoom.
for that reminder. All right, what is it? Okay, do we need to vote on the
Yes, please.
adjournment?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say yay. Or aye.
Yay.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. I'm hearing no nos, so the adjournment passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.